In June of 1978, the thick snowpack covering California's Plumas National Forest finally began to thaw. As foresters pushed deep into the remote woods, they stumbled across an isolated U.S. Forest Service trailer. Inside, they found a grim scene. The body of a young man named Ted Wire was tucked into a bed, wrapped in layers of sheets. He had lost nearly 100 pounds to severe starvation and frostbite. Medical examiners determined he had lived in that bed for anywhere from 8 to 13 weeks. However, the trailer was not empty. Looking at the layout of the interior, Ted's bed sat mere feet away from supply lockers packed with emergency rations, hundreds of freeze-dried meals, and heavy wool blankets. Only a tiny fraction of that food had been opened. Just outside the thin walls sat a heavy-duty propane tank. If someone had simply walked outside and turned the valve, it would have provided the trailer with continuous heat for weeks. This creates a central question that still hangs over the case. How does a man remain in a bed for months and slowly starve while completely surrounded by the resources that would have saved him? To understand how Ted ended up in that trailer, we have to go back to February 24th. Ted was one of 5 young men from Yuba City who piled into a car to watch a college basketball game in nearby Chico. They were incredibly close friends, and that night they were riding high. They were scheduled to play in their own local basketball tournament the very next morning, an event they had been practicing for all year. We also have to consider the group's dynamic. All 5 men lived with mild intellectual disabilities or psychiatric conditions, though they were high-functioning and maintained very structured, consistent routines at home. They left the Chico arena, bought some snacks at a local market, and started the drive back south to Yuba City. Then, they vanished. They had every reason to go home. With their own tournament starting the next morning, there was no indication they had any intention of staying out past their curfew. We can trace their final movements by looking at the location of Jack Madruga's vehicle. As you can see in this 1969 Mercury Montego, it's a heavy sedan, found 19 miles away from that Forest Service trailer. Instead of taking the direct highway back to Yuba City, the car was found parked on a remote mountain road, a 70-mile detour. Navigating a low-clearance sedan up this steep, unpaved road should have torn the car apart, yet investigators found 0 undercarriage damage. The Montego hadn't broken down. The engine was in working order, the gas tank was full, and the tires sat solidly on packed snow. Inside, the keys were missing, and despite the freezing high-altitude temperatures, someone had rolled the windows down slightly, leaving the interior exposed to the elements. The car was operational, fueled, and entirely capable of backing out. For unknown reasons, the group left that warmth behind and walked deeper into the mountains. This brings us to the core mystery. Why do 5 men in lightweight jackets abandon a working car for a 19-mile march through freezing wilderness? One theory suggests an external threat, that they encountered something on that dark road that sparked a panicked flight higher into the mountains. Another theory focuses on Gary Mathias. He was the only member of the group whose body was never recovered. He had a history of schizophrenia, but also formal army training. It is possible that a psychological episode caused Mathias to lead his friends into the woods. Conversely, his military background might have been the very thing that kept the others alive for weeks in the trailer before he disappeared. When we consider Ted Wire's failure to use the supplies in the trailer, some experts point to cognitive paralysis. This is a state where a total break in routine, combined with extreme fear, can freeze a person's ability to perform even basic survival tasks. Stripped of their routines and facing extreme conditions, the men were forced into a situation where their usual logic no longer applied. Looking at this terrain, you can see the landscape the rest of the group faced. Over the following months, searchers found the remains of Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Jack Hewitt scattered in this wilderness. Then there is the state of Gary Mathias. While his friends' remains were eventually identified, Mathias simply vanished. All that was left behind were his shoes, found sitting inside the trailer. Despite theories involving the supernatural or comparisons to other famous mountain mysteries, the evidence points toward a breakdown of the human element. The Yuba County Five remains a case study in how quickly a predictable environment can turn lethal when the ability to make logical decisions is lost to fear and confusion.